This video is part of a series of video instructions on the BioGrace greenhouse gas calculation tool. This is instruction 2.2 on the BioGrace calculation rules. Before starting the instruction, I would like to underline that this video instruction is recorded using version 4C of the BioGrace greenhouse gas calculation tool. At some moment in the future, probably in 2014, version 5 of the tool will be published. This video instruction can also be used for version 5. It will be replaced by an updated version in case any of the rules will change. Some people have asked why BioGrace includes calculation rules, as the methodology has already been defined in the Renewable Energy Directive. BioGrace includes calculation rules as the methodology of RED Annex 5.c does not cover all details. As a consequence, when making actual calculations, there is room for decisions on these details. Such decisions influence the final result of the calculation. BioGrace aims to come to harmonized greenhouse gas calculations, leading to unambiguous results. This means that when two persons would make a calculation using the same set of input data, they should get the same result. This is only possible when they would make the same decisions on these details, not yet covered by the methodology, and that is why BioGrace has made calculation rules. When the draft of the RED was published in January 2008, quite some persons tried to understand how the default values were calculated. They all used a set of input data that was published by DRC. However, no one succeeded to reproduce the RED default values. They all got different results. This had two causes. They used different conversion factors and they made different choices on some details. BioGrace decided to harmonize the calculations, causing that different people will get the same result. In the next sheets, I will present some of the BioGrace calculation rules. The numbers on the sheets refer to the numbering used in the document BioGrace calculation rules. Please note that this video instruction only highlights some of the calculation rules. When using the BioGrace Excel tool for making actual calculations to comply with sustainability criteria, you should be familiar with the content of all calculation rules and therefore study the calculation rule document itself. The rest of this presentation is a point-for-point explanation. In the introduction of the calculation rules, it is stated that the BioGrace greenhouse gas calculation rules are in line with the methodology as given in Annex 5.c and with the communications that were published to further explain the RED. By the way, these communications are listed in the video instruction 2.1. There is one exception, as I will explain in a moment. Rule number 2.1.1 states that the BioGrace calculation rules shall be respected, and that an auditor that checks actual calculations shall not approve the calculations when the rules were not respected. In other words, the calculation rules are mandatory. Rule number 2.1.2 states that the for compliance version of the tool should be used. This means that the track changes function of the tool should be left to on when changing numbers in the tool. If track changes is turned to off, then an auditor shall refuse to verify the calculation. The track changes button has been explained shortly in video instruction 1.4 and will further be explained in video instruction 2.4. Rule number 2.5 states that when you start to make an actual calculation for either cultivation, processing or transport, you should use actual data for all numbers as part of the cultivation, processing or transport steps in the biofuel production pathway. An exception is made for distribution of the fuel from depot to filling station. Let me give two examples. Example 1 on production of biodiesel from rapeseed. If you change the amount of methanol input into the esterification plant where biodiesel is produced from refined rapeseed oil, then you should replace all other numbers in the esterification process, as well as all numbers in the calculations for the oil refining and for the oil mill, as refining and oil mill are also part of the processing. Example 2 on ethanol from sugarcane. If you enter an actual value for the transport distance of sugarcane to a sugar mill, you should also enter actual values for the transport distance of the ethanol from the sugar mill to the depot. The transport distance of the ethanol from the depot to the filling station can be left unchanged. Calculation Rule 2.6. It is allowed to enter the results of previous greenhouse gas calculations on the part of the biofuel production pathway into the BioGrace-I tool, for instance on the cultivation of the crop. Such results on partial and previous calculations can be entered into the BioGrace-I tool in the unit CO2 equivalent per kilogram of intermediate product. More instructions on this are given in a later video instruction. The calculation rule states that the previous calculations shall have been made in BioGrace, or in another greenhouse gas calculation tool that is recognized by the European Commission as a voluntary scheme. Rule number 4.3 is about the use of electricity taken from the electricity grid. This is the only calculation rule where BioGrace deviates from one of the communications from the Commission, as is explained in the footnote to this rule, which is copied on this sheet. The communication of the Commission states that a European average of the emissions from electricity from the grid may be used. The BioGrace calculation rule states that, when making an actual calculation, emissions from using grid electricity shall be calculated from the average emission intensity for the country in which the electricity is taken from the grid. Country average emission intensities for electricity shall be taken from the BioGrace list of additional standard values. It is not allowed to use the average emission intensity for the EU electricity mix. This is because if both the EU average and the national average would be allowed, this would cause that two persons making the same calculation might come to different results, one taking the EU average and the other one taking the national average for grid electricity emissions. Rule number 4.5 is on residues and wastes, which leave the system in which they are formed without any greenhouse gas emission. So, for instance, used cooking oil leaves the restaurant in which it was used without the need to determine the greenhouse gas emission for production and using the cooking oil. However, the point of waste creation is at the restaurant. As a consequence, the transport of the used cooking oil to the collection and processing site, where it is made ready to be processed into a biofuel, has to be included in the greenhouse gas calculations. This is not very clear in version 4C of the BioGrace-I tool, and will probably be improved in version 5. The question on what is a residue or a waste, and which materials should be considered to be a product or co-product, cannot be answered by BioGrace. If you have questions on this, then you should contact the regulatory body in the member state in which the biofuel is brought to the market. The answer can, unfortunately, be different from one member state to another. Some member states have made clear guidances, as for instance this document from the UK. This RTFO guidance on waste and residues contains 5 tables on products, residues from agriculture, aquaculture, forestry and fisheries, waste and processing residues, non-food cellulosic and lignocellulosic material, and other materials. Finally, calculation rule 5 is on land use change. It states that the bonus for restored degraded land and heavily contaminated land can only be used if the Commission has defined these terms, which so far, it is now early August 2013, was not done. The calculation rule also states that, for the calculation of carbon stock emissions from land use change, the rules laid down in the Commission decision on guidelines for the calculation of land carbon stocks, etc., shall be used. A template for this is included in the BioGrace Excel sheet. The calculation of land use change and of improved agricultural management will be explained in a further video instruction.